Hi, everyone. I'm really excited, along with Adam, to be announcing TVL Tent, which is our TVL or This Valorant Life community. We're going to be opening up registrations December 20th. It's going to be just open for 20 people, and it'll be a $5 USD subscription per month. And I'll throw it over to Adam in terms of what we are hoping for this community to be like.
So there's not really that many communities where you can kind of figure out, your people in terms of like improvement. Like a lot of it is like, people are joining and they're kind of just having fun with the game. So this is going to be a space where if you're really trying to improve and, want to be around people that will support you to do so, that's kind of what it's for. So just some things to keep in mind. It's not going to be a place where you're going to be coping. If you're having a loss streak, stuff like that, you can mention it, but we're not going to feed into the cope. We are wanting to, I guess, emphasize the fact that it's improvement based, and everything that is positive will be aligned with that. And if there's any kind of like negative, I guess, vibes, it's definitely not encouraged here.
Yeah, so we're super excited about that. And Adam and I aren't doing this to make a boatload of money. We're just doing this because we're hoping that this could be a positive place of change for the gaming community. I'm sure it needs it. I'm sure you probably agree. The $5 a month, what we're going to be doing is the $5 a month is going to go into a pool when it reaches $800, which would take a few months. We're going to create a scholarship process where someone will apply. I think we'll probably involve the community members to select the winner, and they're going to get a heavily discounted 2-month coaching program with Adam. And so that's usually costs $1,000. They'll only put $200 towards it. We'll put the 800 from the community fund towards it, and we'll just keep rolling that and doing that as much as we can whenever that number comes up. So we're super excited about this. If you want to join us, please sign up. It's on Ko-fi or Coffee, and we're going to have links in the community posts. Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 43 of This Valorant Life. In this episode, Adam and I are going to be going over how to actually improve, because most of you know you need to get better at certain things. I'm in this group too. But how do we actually go about making that happen? Because just trying to do it better doesn't always make that thing happen. So with that, Adam, we were talking before the show. What are the kind of two groups of people in terms of how you break people down for improvement?
So you kind of have like, well, working with like a bunch of different age groups, you naturally get older people that are a little bit more, I guess, mature, like emotionally more stable, and younger players tend to not be able to focus on the things they should be focusing on. So typically the younger category of players is a lot more mindset. Their approach to the game needs to be adjusted, their mentality, like all of that stuff, keeping them in check is really important to look at. I guess another way to maybe phrase that is it's more of like a performance coaching thing,
Okay.
which I'm not a performance coach by any means, but I can kind of share my experiences with them. And then the other category with the older players, they're a lot more mature, but they might be a little bit, newer to the game, and they just don't have much time investment into the game. So a lot of our sessions are making sure they understand what the problem is, and then understanding how to solve the problem. And then if there's any like requirements in terms of getting them into a custom game, and kind of just walking through them what it looks like, so they have that visual understanding, so they know what to replicate, then that's what we'll do.
So maybe let's start off with the younger group then, in terms of mindset problems. Assuming someone has a mindset problem, like what would you categorize those problems as? What are the typical ones that you see?
So autopiloting is a huge one. And I felt into this earlier when I was climbing back to rating. It's like I wasn't playing my games with intensity. And, we reference Broken by Concept a lot, but they push the idea of playing with intensity. So it's easier said than done, but the number that I aim for is like 80% or more. So if I notice like a player isn't communicating, then I'm like, well, you're not playing with intensity, because you have a mic, you're talking to me in the call with your mic, but you're not using it in game. Why is that? It's like, well, I just don't comm that much. Well, I'm like, well, then you obviously don't care to get that free value that you could be getting. And, the thing that kind of is interesting about that is like they're paying me quite a bit of money to get coaching to improve, when they could just be using their microphone to get some added value. So that's one of the first things I always touch on is like, if you're not calming a lot, I'm going to call you out on it. Now, that doesn't mean that, to go on a quick tangent, that doesn't mean that you have to be a player that has to communicate to get value, because there are plenty of players that don't calm and are high rank.
Yes.
So that's a question I asked him, is like, do you want to be a player that climbs without communicating? Or do you want to be like, what type of player do you want to become, type of thing? And almost all of them want to communicate more. It's just they don't. So I give them like a little bit of entry level. So I break down comms in like level 1, level 2 type of things. And level 1 is just giving straight info. X player hit for Y damage. This player is over in that location, that type of thing. And then as you level up your comms, you can look to do action comms, like peek with me, 3, 2, 1 swing, double swing, up, down. Can you smoke before I use my dart? Like just really evolving that way. But yeah, that's, I guess, the first.
For players that don't calm, how do you get players who are kind of stuck, kind of being really, really quiet and being reticent to calm? How do you force them out of that comfort zone? Or how do you support them in stepping out of that?
I guess there's not really like, I know there's like some practical stuff that you could probably recommend, is like, communicate when you're playing deathmatch, or every time you use your util, you say something. I guess the first thing I'll just try to urge them to do is understand the importance of calming, because I find that if they understand it first, then they can kind of replicate it a little bit more. And one thing I did with one client was, because he was a duelist player and he was kind of in the idea that duelists don't need to calm as much. So I pulled up Zekken VOD, and we kind of just walked through it and noticed how much he would communicate and what types of things he would communicate, and also realizing how simple and easy it was to communicate those things. Because although Zekken calms a lot, he doesn't make it complex. Like, it's very much like, let's just hit C here, and then can I get a smoke?
Okay.
That type of thing. So I think that helps a lot for the younger players, because they look up to these pros, and if they understand that this is kind of what it, it takes, they'll be more willing to do it.
And what about, I would think tilting is another common issue. How do you get players to improve on that? What would you assign them, or how does that look?
Yeah, tilting is a tough one. So I guess like the first thing that I always mention with tilt is that, number one, it's like, my experience at least, it's not something that you can avoid. Like, tilt will happen. It's more so about having the tools to regulate them, or regulate your tilt. So the first thing I always recommend is a pre-round ritual. What helped me a lot is, after a huge round, whether I won or lose, let's say I'm in a 1v4 clutch and I won it, or I just barely lost, immediately my emotions are spiked. So I'll try and do the physiological sigh, which, if you guys checked out the episode we did with Coach Ryan, he talks about it there as well. But that's one. There's a bunch of different things you can do to reset.
Yeah.
Jing, I believe, will just stand up and sit back down. Austin is known for his little jazz hands.
Yeah.
So something that will allow you to reset and just kind of reframe your focus.
Okay. So not trying to avoid tilt by making it not happen, but it's about creating replicable process for you that helps you refocus in the moment.
Really important. And this seems to be really useful for me when I'm having like a poor performance game. Like, let's say like I don't know, 1 kill, 8 deaths or something. And I look at the scoreboard and I'm just like kind of feeling myself drift away, just resetting and then, getting back into it. It's like, it almost like it's back to your 0-0. And something that I picked up a long time ago that I used to tell myself, and it's actually reminding me now, is this phrase of play it like it's 8-8. Now, I stole it from some other player in some other tournament, so we don't have to know the story, but play it like it's 8-8, regardless of, if it's close or not. It's a really good cue to refocus.
And to feel like it's in your control and it's important. Okay. Are there any other kind of mindset issues that typically crop up?
So their approach to the game is kind of important. I guess some players, for some reason, feel the need they don't need to warm up. And for those type of players, I always encourage them to at least try it out to see if it will be better for them. And then,
when you're getting someone to try something out, you could warm up once and suddenly you are ass pass for that day. And then you do the same warm up next time and you're not. How much repetition would you say try this out for before you say it's good or bad?
Typically a
A
week.
week.
But we try to, like in my head, I try to push for 2 weeks, but just because the weekly, like the calls, or the frequency that I'm working with the client is weekly, we'll just check in on a weekly
Okay.
basis and make any pivot changes if we need to.
Okay. Okay.
Um, but the other thing with their approach that's pretty common is the amount of games that someone will play. So I generally recommend 3 to 5 in a block. Some people push 9 or 10,
That's a lot.
it's a lot, especially for the younger players. They'll push 9, 10, maybe even 12. I've seen 16. I'm just like, if you want to play that much, let's split it up into blocks. So play your 3 to 5 games, take a break. Play your 3 to 5, like we can do it in blocks. Otherwise, you're gonna forfeit the coaching RR guarantee that I have, because that is something that's really important to your improvement, is actually playing with high focus and high intensity. And if you're playing on repeat like that, back to back to back, you won't be able to play with high intensity. It just doesn't work like that. So
I was reading a book actually recently. It was one we were talking about last time, called Meditation for Mortals, and there's no hard and fast rule for this. And we've talked about this before as well, around schedule. Like, what does an ideal productivity schedule look like? And the one thing that he was kind of remarking on in this book, it's called Meditation for Mortals, is that if you look at across some of the most productive, capable, thoughtful people in the world, between like Virginia Woolf to like Winston Churchill, they had very, very different schedules. But they all kind of had about 3 hours of peak work, plus or minus. And I think it kind of reflects that we can't really do anything with super, super, super high intensity for more than 3 hours. And they talk about it that even in a day, you're going to have about 3 hours of intense knowledge work. I don't think Valorant is intense knowledge work, but if you're doing 3 hours of intense knowledge work, you don't really have much left over. So there's not a lot of point in terms of just grinding and doing more. I think Valorant's different, but I would think that 3 hours of intense concentration as one gaming block is probably like a good bite-sized piece to use when you're structuring your time. Like, there's a reason that if you look at most professional sports, they take about 3 hours. They don't take 8.
Right. Yeah, I like that. I mean, there's a ton of people talking about that. Like, you have the 4-hour work week, you have Deep Work by Cal Newport. It's like, Huberman talks about it with like his 90-minute work blocks. Like, there's a lot of, I guess, info on that, but it seems like it's not really being applied in the gaming space, at least not in the levels below tier 1. Like, I would imagine tier 1 practice is maybe a little bit more structured and they have, a lot more breaks and stuff like that, but it's not being adopted by people like us as much.
So that's kind of the players with the mindset issues. Yes. What about the players that you're not going to, they've already conquered that, or it's not an issue, and you're kind of saying that a little more mature players, if you are trying to help them sort out in-game improvement areas that they need to work on, how do you go about doing that? And what do the problems usually look like?
It seems to almost always be a mixture of mechanics and decision making.
Okay.
Which both are tall tasks and really big umbrellas, but we kind of have to prioritize like one thing for each. So I like to work on them in parallel, but not overemphasize one over the other.
Okay.
So
what would that look like? One that comes to mind recently.
Peaking technique. It's a lot of people tend to like autopilot their swings. They don't have really good crosshair placement, or they'll just take a swing. Like, they'll take one swing for a lot of different angles instead of cutting it up and being a little bit more thorough. So it's kind of a painful process, but I go back and highlight all of these, and then I go into custom and I showed what I would do, and you can kind of see like 1 peak versus like 5. Mm-hmm. And I'm not, I guess, asking them to go from 1 to 5 immediately, but I would like to see like 1 to 2 mm-hmm. or like 1 to 3 and just cut it up a little bit more finely. Of course, you can walk them through a custom and do it that way. I always reference this one Yay crosshair clip. Like, literally, if you just go on YouTube and type in Yay crosshair placement, the first video that will probably pop up is his full 30-minute video or something. but the one below it is like a 90-second clip of him walking around on Pearl and just peeking angles. And it really highlights the overemphasis that he has on peeking, because he'll basically walk up, swivel his crosshair to pre-aim, and then peek out, and then pause, and then swivel, pre-aim, peek, pause. So I've been using the term pause peek, which basically means you get up to the angle and you kind of like ready yourself before you peek, make sure your crosshair placement's good, and then you actually execute the peek. So it takes like about a second, maybe half a second to get that pause peek down, but I think it's a really good thing. So if that's what we're working on, we'll basically kind of go through all of what I just talked about, and that's their focus mechanically for the week. And then if they're struggling,
and so mechanically, let's stop there. If you're that focuses on mechanically having much more thorough, high dedication or high rigor peaks, are you getting them to practice that in death matches? Are you getting them to just do it in customs, or is it more of a focus in the game, or is it both?
There are recommendations that I do. So like in the warm up, I generally recommend for this issue to play death matches, Sheriff, no audio. You're familiar with this.
Yep.
Our podcast listeners might be, but that's because if you don't have sound, you have to clear your off angles.
Yes.
And if you have a Sheriff, you have to be thorough, because it's going to be pretty difficult to wide swing
Yes.
and then adjust and then hit the shot,
Yes.
because you can't spray and burst. So being really thorough, it punishes you pretty hard. So that's one. So you can do that in practice.
Yes.
Doing it in custom helps a lot for sure. Especially if you're unfamiliar with a new map. Like Zasco was actually mentioning this with Abyss, because we reviewed Abyss, and he feels like he doesn't have this problem on any other map aside from Abyss. And I was pointing it out. I was like, you just weren't thorough here at all. And he was like, it's just a new map. I'm not comfortable. I'm gonna have to go into a custom and do it. And then he did, and then he had results.
Okay.
So that works out really well for him.
Okay.
But during the match, I try and not force mechanical focuses on people. I think that's something that's better done in training. Like, let's say, for example, you like one of the recommendations was to burst strafe constantly in game. Now, if it's a huge issue, then that might be the literally number one priority in the ranked game. But in ranked, there's just so many other things you need to be focusing on so you can actually have value in the game, that I think that's better off done in training and maybe just at the back of your mind in a ranked game. Whereas I think decision making normally takes precedence in terms of mental stack during a ranked game.
It would align with the process or the advice that usually gets given for a highly mental game. Like, the one that comes to mind for me is golf. In golf, you can have very mechanically focused swing cues. Like, when you're swinging, you're thinking of, I should be doing this or this. And most of the time they would say, if you've been working on a mechanical swing improvement, you've been trying to do one thing differently, even when you're on the court, when you're practicing, you can think about it all you want and you're trying to improve it. But when you're on the course, you don't really want to be thinking about a mechanical improvement, because part of getting into flow is being kind of present. And the way to get out of being present is to be overly mechanical. And so, right, if you're trying to improve one mechanical thing, instead of focusing on that, you do it in practice. And then when you're on the course, it's more about tempo. Most people think more about, it's like, I'm going to count 1 up slowly and then 2 down fast. And that gives me a tempo that I'm playing to. It's more of a feel cue than it is a mechanical cue. And kind of, that's what I'm hearing here. That's better, or you've found that that's better in terms of working with people.
100%. And maybe that's why the pause peak works so well. It's like you change the tempo deliberately, but so you're aware of it. But
yeah, so it's more of a feel thing. It's focusing on the feel part of the mechanic rather than the mechanic part of the mechanic. I think in the inner game of tennis, they talk about focusing on the hairs on the tennis ball, like trying to see the hairs on the tennis ball rather than focusing on your racket. It kind of brings you into the moment. The football version of that is Pete Carroll, who was former coach of the Seattle Seahawks. He would get people to read inner game of tennis. And I think there was an example where a player was overthinking it when he was a kickoff returner, because that ball is coming down and there's a lot of things in your head. 1 is, can I catch it? 2, I don't want to fumble it. 3 is, if I catch it and the guy's too close and I can't evade him and I don't call fair catch, I am going to the life will be creamed out of me, right? And so he said that one thing he gets those players to do, or this is the example, was to get them to try to count backwards from 10 so it lands at 1 when the ball's in your arm, because I think it was just this way to like focus in the moment without getting overwhelmed with too many inputs. So more of a feel thing than a mechanic. Okay, so pause peak. So that would be the mechanic aspect of how to improve that. What about in-game util tempo type stuff, or even just positioning? What would be a common problem, and then how would you help a player work on that?
So a lot of it is just lack of knowledge, or like just not having a good heuristic to follow. So for example, with the positioning thing on defense, this comes up a lot. So I guess I'll just give the example and work backwards. Duelist players tend to contest neutral space a lot more than other roles. So just think about Ascent, you'll be A main or B main. The problem is you hear about this in YouTube videos, and I used to talk about it a lot too, where you should be contesting neutral space so you can condition them that you're fighting them, and then they use util, and now it's like you want to punish them if they're not using util. The problem is though, if you're trying to carry a game on defense, that's actually the exact opposite thing you should be doing. You should be playing, instead of playing extremities and contesting neutral space too frequently, you should be actually playing fast rotate and just being in the action as quick as possible so you can flood. So the number I've started to give is 80% of the rounds on defense, you want to be playing fast rotate. So that means you're going to be in the center of the map somehow. On Ascent, that could literally be AFK and CT spawn. Some people like to play mid 3, so top mid. Mm-hmm. Some people like to play market. Some people like to play pizza. Some people like to play catwalk. But as long as you're centered on around the map somewhat, that kind of fits the 80% category. And then 20% of the rounds, you can play extremities. So that doesn't even actually mean contesting the neutral space. That could mean sitting, using the Ascent example, A heaven on Ascent behind the box. I call that coffin, and you just AFK back there. That could also mean you could be contesting A main with the one way and kind of fighting for that space. But just notice how that's only 20% of the rounds. Now, each game is a little bit different. Mm-hmm. It could be 70-30, 60-40, maybe even 50-50. But it's pretty extreme for that ratio to go the other way, 20-80, where you're playing fast rotate. Now, it's possible, but just, I guess, giving them that first kind of thought process, and then also having specific rounds to do that on might help as well. Mm-hmm. So for example, every single pistol round that you play on defense, fast rotate. Don't care what their comp is, don't care what your comp is, just AFK and spawn and fast rotate. First gun round, probably same thing, because you don't have enough data on what they're doing. Come your second, third gun round, like say round 5, and you have a better idea of what they're doing, maybe you can go contest neutral space if you want to. But just like actually walking through the rounds and giving them like better things to follow, and I guess even talking about how to rotate and flood into the site. So going back to this Ascent example, if you're playing CT spawn and there's noise A, you're just going to rotate into heaven, activate your dash, and then swing out after the A main smoke is ready. But you're not going to go before, you're not going to go after. So really walking through the round in terms of the decision making so that they know what to do when they get into the game. And I find that in my own case, if I kind of like create mock scenarios in my head, or even just look at a VOD and kind of figure out that scenario, all it is just executing that pattern when I'm in the game. And one thing I notice about myself is I have a really hard time coming up with plays on the fly. Like almost all of my plays are rehearsed in my head or from another situation beforehand. And like I've problem solved it through repetitions and reflection. But the weird thing about this is like I play Raze a lot. So you would think my Raze nade is a lot of on the fly nades. That is kind of the opposite. Like I saw OD26 do this nade on split, and he was coming up B heaven on attack. Yeah, I saw he's coming up male into B heaven on attack, and he bounced the nade off of the top of like this wall, so it landed into the CT stairs smoke. And in my head, I'm like, I've always done that jump throw. Like I would always peek deeper and jump throw it because I didn't know that angle existed. And this is kind of what I mean. Like intuitively, that stuff doesn't come to me. But like once I see it once, I immediately understand next time I'm going male and I'm splitting B into B heaven, I can do that nade. So that's how I approach the decision-making thing. Create a pattern and then figure out what you're going to do when you recognize that pattern. And normally it's something first, like you have to recognize the first piece of it, and then everything else will kind of fall into it.
If I'm trying to draw out into a more general thing though, it's kind of, if you're going to be doing an in-game non-mechanics related focus point, it's trying to draw it into a general principle that will guide how you play. And I think the one thing I'm pulling out from what you're talking about is that 80/20 helps me simplify my decision making so that I will have more mental bandwidth to think about other things.
I think that's a huge part of it, is like if you can simplify all of these complex things into something that's shorter, it really makes all the work done. And like this kind of clicked for me when Cal Newport was talking about this in a podcast. Like he tries to simplify complex things into 2-word phrases. So deep work, digital minimalism, or like you can kind of already infer what those 2 things are just by hearing the 2 words.
Click heads.
Click heads. Fast rotate.
Yeah.
So contest neutral. Well, I was going to say contest neutral space. That's 3 words. But, you know, simplifying those things helps a ton.
Okay. So in terms of improvement there, then it's less about, that's less hard on in terms of execution. And that's more about just taking the time to figure out what the thing is that you want to focus on, and then just having that. And would you tell players mostly to like have a post-it on their monitor? Like how do you usually get, if someone's trying to do something for a week, how do you get them to remember to do that?
So when I give them the notes, it's typically divided in halves. So for your offense half, like one of the points generally is bolded, and then on defense, another point is generally bolded. So if on attack your util timing is bad, that's bolded, and then on defense you're not playing enough fast rotate, that's bolded. So I always encourage them to look at their notes before the game starts. And they just get that reminder. Some people have 2 monitors, so they can kind of just look back and forth. Some people do prefer the sticky note method, but I guess the general principle here is just refresh your mind so you're going into the match with a sense of purpose.
And what about when it's a knowledge piece? Like you just don't know the smoke locations on this map, or you don't know, if you're a Sova main, you don't know the spam locations on this map. What do you get a player to do for those types of gaps in their game?
Typically, this is more of like a quiz-oriented type of thing. So like if I'm in there with the call with them, I'll show them all of the basic smokes and then kind of explain why the smoke is better and where you might get a little bit of leeway of not doing it. And then after kind of going through a few maps, we'll go back and revisit them, like either in Valorant or a custom. And then after that, it's going to be like, let's say like a week or 2 down the road, and I notice that they're doing a different smoke. It's going to just be more of like a reminder, like, hey, do you remember when we talked about these smokes? He's like, oh yeah, I remember now. Like I just didn't really remember in the game. And like over time, like it will, as they get more awareness over it, it will eventually course correct. But I haven't had a problem yet with the client where basic util usage like that, locations and stuff like that, hasn't clicked enough over time.
And what about, so you talked about kind of location, like a location focused or positioning focused goal on defense. What about on attack? How do you get someone, let's say, that plays Reyna and should be the support duelist and should be second person in, should be following the other duelist? How do you get them, let's say they're not doing that well, how do you get them to improve on their positioning there? What would be the, what would you be asking them to do?
It really is just understanding the order of operations during an execute. So if we kind of break it down a little bit, normally smokes go first, followed by initiator util, followed by duelist going out, and then the initiators are typically like right behind, or the controller, whatever. So what I try to get them to do is just actually understand when that timing of util is coming down. Oh, smokes are up? Okay, it's go time. And, you know, also understanding the ratio there, because sometimes it's better to go before the smokes go, you know, but like 80% of the time, maybe even 90, you're going to wait for the smokes, and then you're going to ask for your dart or whatever, and then you're going to go. The other thing that's really, really easy to do for these duelist players is just to follow a teammate if they're already in front of you. So if your jet dashes in, you simply just random blind and then follow them, or you follow util that kind of mimics that formula. So drone util, like a Sova drone, Sky Dog, Fade Prowler, and Gecko ult, they all kind of lead the charge. So you're simply just baiting it and trading it. And if you can recognize it, you're good to go.
And as you're entering, or kind of second entry, let's say, how are you choosing to peek angles? Are you peeking the same angle that entry duelist is peeking because you want to trade them? Or are you trying to get the 90-degree angle that they're not looking at because they're clearing another angle?
It starts with the mini map. So as you're about to enter out, normally you're in a smoke or something like that. When your jet dashes out or your util's going out, you're staring at the mini map. You're not even looking at your crosshair yet. So that will kind of aid you in that decision. And then you kind of need to understand if they saw someone, you're probably going to be peeking the same angle as them. If they didn't see someone, then you might be covering their other angle that they can't see. So you have to get the awareness of what the threats are first. That's what the mini map is. And then after that, it kind of depends situation. But generally, like the rule of thumb is whatever your teammate is looking at, you look at their angle that they can't fight. Or like you're kind of covering the thing that they can't cover. So that's the general recommendation.
And so for that, then that would be kind of a focus of a player on attack to be positionally right behind your entry and peeking and watching your mini map and then using the mini map to inform the angles you're peeking. So in those types of situations, though, you're not going to be nearly as clinical with your peaks.
No. And that's okay because like there's a lot of util behind you. Typically when you're on a fast execute like that, you're not going to go like your peaks aren't going to be looking super clean. So the thing that I try to recommend for this is on an execute, you want to at least do a proper deady peek on the common angle. And then anything after that, you can kind of just, be a little bit more free flowing. So let's say like you're coming up A short unbind on attack. When you flash out of that smoke, you're going to do a deady peek on U-Hull. Or maybe like pocket or something. And then after that, you're kind of just running around. So deady peeking the common angles as you're doing an execute or as you're attacking on a bomb site is a very good rule of thumb to follow.
Okay. Is there anything we're missing? What about players needing to do some research of just watching a pro playing their agent? Do you assign that to players? You usually do it with them when they don't seem to understand the identity of their agent?
So it's built into the curriculum now with my coaching programs. So like every week for their role, I do like a group coaching session where I'll bring up, let's say, Clove Haven. I'll basically start that recording in that session by explaining how I would play that on that half, and then we'll kind of compare it to the pro doing it. So that's kind of where that is covered. But before that was part of the curriculum, or if someone needs or would like to do like bonus stuff, then what I like to do is I encourage them to look at someone that plays with their same play style. So I guess going further with this Clove example, you might want to look at someone that's hyper aggressive if you are a hyper aggressive Clove, and look at their VOD. But most of the time I don't really encourage them to VOD review because that's kind of what they hired me for. And I'm more so looking for them to focus on the implementation. And if they have questions, hit me up type of thing. But I don't want them to be stuck because I guess within that camp, you have players that are too much, like don't play the game enough. And then players that do play the game too much. And for the players that typically don't play the game enough, they like to spend a lot of time doing the research element. So
is there anything we didn't cover in terms of improvement that you would be getting players to do inside or outside of the game? Like we didn't talk too much. We talked a little bit about DM with no sound sheriff. Are there any other types of things that you'd be assigning to players to help them?
I guess like general things might be like having some sort of quick review process. So I know we recommended this before, is like you can clip your deaths and then go back and look at it. I think that's valuable. I think if you do clip your deaths or you're just aware of it, like let's say you notice error in your aiming, or like you consistently overflick, or maybe you're every time you flick you have like this weird jitter as you land, like those type of things, you can target that a little bit more in an aim trainer, or just understanding the actual aim technique. So that is actually a big thing. A lot of people don't really understand proper aim technique. So if I'm like reviewing their VOD and I kind of notice that, I will try to walk them down the rabbit hole without leading them too far into the rabbit hole, just so they can kind of get the foundations. I might send them some voltaic videos, or a video like from Minigod that kind of explains the aiming technique a little bit more, just so they're more aware of it. But more like, I guess, like general recommendations, I don't think we've really missed much. We covered the warm-up, we covered the mental, we covered the decision-making stuff. Everything after that, it's kind of just more specific.
Do you ever assign sleep?
I've talked to some people about it.
Okay.
And I'm glad you brought it up, because some people do have really bad sleep schedules. particularly younger players, like they'll be like, "Oh yeah, I just woke up." I'm like, "It's 1 p.m." Or like, "Oh, I just it's 11 a.m." Like, so it's something that I bring up, but I can't really force them to do it. Maybe I'll send them like a reference for it or like a resource. Like Zasco, for example, he's really like all in on
Yeah.
it. So I only have to mention it once and he's got it. But some other people, they're pretty resistant to it. And it's not like I can force them to do it. So I'll bring it up, but yeah.
One thing, there's a guy on YouTube named Reisu. I think we talked about this last time. He has this great video around how he stopped scrolling on his phone, and he talks about how he implemented turning his phone into a dumb phone. So it looks pretty cool, I think. But yeah, it just looks way cleaner. Is that in focus?
Yes.
Yeah. So like you can see, like it just makes the phone way less enticing to use and a little harder to use. But then it just makes it something like you use as a resource rather than something that you habitually use. And then this is related because a lot of times I think we end up scrolling like infinitely before we go to bed. So um, if that's something that bothers you, just something to consider, because I've actually found it pretty helpful. And then turning off notifications. I think
That's a
the
big one.
average person gets 40, maybe like 100 notifications a day. That's a lot of interruptions in a day that keeps you kind of hijacked or having something else tell you what to focus on. So just, I mean, I feel like I've turned it off. I already know I need to check my messages every now and then. I feel like it's a huge level up in terms of just your attention.
I had to uninstall a couple apps on my phone, and then I even blocked YouTube on my browser, so I can't even access YouTube on my phone because I was spending too much time on it. So
Yeah.
yeah, increasing friction is definitely a big thing for stuff like that.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching. We hope this was helpful, and we'll be back again. We are planning, hopefully, a cool crossover episode on episode 50. We will surprise you with that. And until next week, have a great day.
Thank you. Peace out.